Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
So today you can forget your Harry and Meghan Markle interviews. This is the interview of 2021, where I welcome my good wife, Rebecca Lauder, who has had an illustrious career that's not only impressed me, but actually the commercial world as well. So welcome to today's show, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So let's kick off right from the top. Tell us a bit about your career thus far to date. What's brought you to where you are, and some of the kind of quirks along the journey that you took, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. I always think, you're getting old when you have to try and condense your career down into a few sound bites. But I've kind of thought about this quite recently, and I kind of block my career into three segments. My formative years, my speciality or specialization years, and then my leadership years. So what I mean by formative years is, for me, that was really my start in PayPal, where I joined as, a customer service rep on the phone doing shift work. And when I joined, they made the point that I had a master's and why would I want to start on the phones? And I said, well, look, I'm looking to get in and make steps up towards where I want to go. So I did that, and it was amazing, just humbling experience. I got to meet some fantastic people, really understanding why customer satisfaction and focus is so important. And then I spent sort of the next 5 years in PayPal exploring the career of, an analyst, a marketing executive, process re-engineering. I did my Six Sigma green belt. When I left PayPal then, and this is where I kind of move into specialization, my background was in marketing, and I was so passionate about it. I had carved out a coordinator role for myself in PayPal that hadn't been there before because I just loved it that much. But I knew I needed that kind of really hands-on experience, really at the turn of kind of digital marketing as well. So I made the leap, and I took an internship at 28, we just got married. But I knew that I had to do that because even though I had this great experience, I wasn't specialized yet in the field that I wanted to get into. So I took the leap, I took the dole, and I did an internship for sort of 2 months. And then they took me on full time. And I did that role then in Trade Doubler, doing digital demand generation, campaign management, all of the kind of CPM, CPL type of work. And then transformed that into a career into the software space. So delivering demand generation for software companies, starting with Quest. And I absolutely loved marketing. I loved the combination of data. I loved the customer journey, and I'll talk more about that later. I loved, I think as well, marketing was just at the cusp of being able to measure the return on investment. And having done analytics in PayPal, I was hugely passionate about data and using that to, show your results, not about feeling or what do people think about something. You could actually tie it into closed won revenue. I then transitioned into startup in Nitro, where I took on my first kind of real leadership role, running EMEA marketing for Nitro. Small enough team, but we were responsible for everything: PR, events, dem gen, the whole gamut. And then I joined Oracle, and this is really where the leadership started. I, was hired in to look after a team of 100 people when I had, managed 3 individual contributors really up until then. And I asked them the question during the interview, yes, I understand you're looking for somebody with digital marketing acumen, but, how does that translate into what you look for here? And they said, well, we need somebody that really understands that buyer's journey, that can articulate that to a team of 100 people. And we believe you have the smarts to build on the leadership piece.
Wow.
And I was really fortunate in working for an incredible leader, Declan Kenny, who you worked with in Dell.
He was my boss, good one too.
Yeah, you gave me some, when I said I'd met with him, he said, oh, he's a good guy. And he was absolutely right. And he saw something in me. And I said this to him recently. I said, you saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. And he took that punt and he invested in me and helped me become the leader that I believe I am today. So a very quick way of condensing, I think, 15 years into a couple of sound bites.
Indeed. And a journey I've been along for the ride with, for sure. I definitely want to get into what that journey looks like, etc., from a woman's perspective. And everyone talks about women leadership today, but we'll come to those items later. I want to hone in on a point. You and I have interesting dinner conversations, as you can imagine. Being in our respective backgrounds, we often talk shop on a regular basis. But I want to talk to a point that you brought up, I want to say about a year ago, and it really struck me. It's anecdotal, but it seems to bear itself out in any evidence, any sort of scenario I've seen present itself. And it's around the progressiveness of societies based on the education of women and their openness and attitude and levels of communication. Maybe just dive into that for a moment, if you would.
Yeah, it was actually probably more than a year ago for me when I was reflecting on the mother and babies homes and trying to understand how something like that could have happened and why, now where it's not happening today and why it stopped, and albeit with not all the salute, the recompense that should be there. And I was trying to think, what's changed? And I kind of joked in making light of something that's not something to be made light of, is that I think today, if I look at my friends and we talk about the kind of relationships we have at home, we're very much on the same page with our partners. So, for the most part, we make decisions together. If I have a point of view that's very counter his or yours, sure, you make that known. And likewise, I make the same. And I just think about, our mothers and whether they had that same voice. And then, if they didn't, and clearly they didn't, right? Why didn't they? And, even not so far back as one generation, the investment just wasn't made for women in the same way. Now, of course, there are exceptions, and there were highly educated families and women who maybe, stood by while these things happened. But I just think as a generation, education of women is not even considered as a thing. It's like, of course you would be educated. Of course you would, sure, at least get to leading cert level. And of course you would go on and specialize in whatever that is, a trade or going on to third level. And it also made me think about, if you look at some of the heavier conflict areas and you look at the position of women in those societies and how they're treated, maybe not even as second class, but third class citizens. And so, look, I'm not going to pretend like I'm authority on the position, but it just, for me, and I think about what my parents gave me, was the very best education opportunities, such that I feel like I have a very much an authentic right to an opinion, whether it's amongst my friends or whether it's at home and we're talking about, where are we going to make our next investment. And I think the fact that we don't think about it just shows how prevalent education now is where it wasn't before.
And I think it's based on fact and not emotion as well. Yeah. So just to give the listeners context, you're from a family of all girls, and you were all given a mantra of, and particularly the school that you went to, which I absolutely love, albeit an all-girls school, and that's a discussion for another day, whether daughters do better in all-girls schools versus mixed schools, etc. I went to a mixed school and I think it was better for me as a male, but that's a side issue. But what I loved about the school that you went to was that their attitude was, we want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you can be a doctor or a lawyer. That's the attitude, first and foremost. To hell, fuck being a woman, fuck being whatever society tells you, you can do it. But I do want to drill into, like, that's the attitude piece, right? That's, I'm going to go out there and get it.
Yeah.
What happens as a barrier along that journey in your career
Yeah.
Because biologically you're different, right?
Yeah.
You have children, men can't do that. I'm absolutely an egalitarian, as you
Yeah.
well know. I don't think we'd be sat here if that weren't the case.
Yeah.
But I want you just to share with our listeners, if you would, like, what are the barriers women see in their careers?
Yeah, I think we all start off with the same belief of we can do anything, not in an entitled perspective, but just this,
Sure.
You're looking at other people around you in your early 20s and you see they're all being successful. And as you get older, you start to see less and less of those people. And there's, a lot of people far more versed in this topic than myself who say, if she can't see it, she can't be it. And that's something I've definitely noticed, particularly I would say in the technology space, is that as you look around as a woman who was fortunate and chose to have children, there's
Sure.
not a huge amount of people that you can look around and go, God, they're doing it like me. They have the family, they have the kids, and they're still able to, quote unquote, be successful.
Sure.
So what are the barriers? I think, the last decade, I won't lie, has been incredibly difficult for the reason that we chose to have children. And it was definitely something we wanted. But I absolutely felt an extra layer of internal pressure to keep progressing. So, making sure that I had a certain level before I had my first child and making sure I got the next level before I had my second. And yeah, I'm always really conscious because it comes from the privilege of being able to have kids as easy as we could. But I do think, I kind of, and it's sad to say, but I kind of sighed a sigh of relief when we'd had our third and last, which was, oh my God, now I don't have to carry the multi-mindedness of where do I go next and how do I tie that into having the next child. So I think it's just, that part of nature that you cannot fight. There's no money you can throw at it. There's nothing anyone can do, does present a barrier to keep progressing. The other thing is just having the right level of income to justify the childcare. Like that's an absolute disaster for a lot of people where they go, this is just simply not worth financially my time. I mean, I know the next question, I am preempting it, is like, have I experienced sort of outright discrimination based on the fact that I'm a woman?
Sure.
No, there's a level of subtlety and unconscious bias, and that term gets bandied around a lot. But I think it's important because I don't believe in the people that I have met that they are sitting there going, you know what, we're not going to hire her because she's a woman. But what they look for is, that progression, that, how many people have you led?
Let me frame that for you, Rebecca. Do women in your profession have a hard time getting promoted? That's probably a different way to look at it.
No, like I said, so maybe let me give you an example. Like, I don't believe at the end of an interview process, there is a man and a woman, that are being selected, and somebody is going, we will hire the man because the alternative is a woman. However, going into that pipeline at the beginning, there are far more men. And I see this every day when I'm interviewing for managers. If I put a role out there, I will get 5 men and 1 woman. So just the law of pipeline means you're going to lose most of those people, throughout those stages. And, if there's going to be 5 men going in and 1 woman, then the probability is you will be left with 2 men. Now, people looking at that will go, well, they hired a man over a woman. But it's far more complex than that. You need the pipeline. Women need to apply for the jobs. They need to trust themselves and back themselves so that there's far more equality going into the pipeline at the start.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure myself, kind of being in situations with respect, as you said, there's nobody overtly saying at the end of the process that it's, we need a woman in this role or we need a man in this role. Although I feel sometimes it's more likely that people are being very deliberate about the agenda to actually have more women in leadership roles. What do you think about that?
That's definitely true, and that's, and it should be. You need to be looking at yourself and going, why don't we have more women? And again, I go back to, there's just simply not as many, especially in my field. The company I've just left, Oracle, we have, I was leading that team. My second was a female, but then the rest of the team was men. And we know that men love working with women and women love working with men. And so we were, actively looking for women, and we could not get either the applications or the skill set that we were looking for, but far more the applications. Women were taking themselves out early and kind of going, out of these 10 things on the CV, I can do 7 of them really well, but I'm not sure about those other 3. Whereas a man, and 100% in every interview, will go, oh, I can do 3 of these things fantastically. The other 7 I'm not sure of, but sure, I'll give it a lash.
Sheryl Sandberg talks about that.
Yeah, it's just, it's formative years. It's, society. It's where we've come from. But, it is important that people like myself in this position, show that it is possible. Not easy, but it is possible to progress your career, and not, question yourself. Like, challenge yourself, but don't question yourself. I think that's the learning, I would say.
I like that. That's a good perspective. And for me, that would be pretty much a decent strategy that could help women achieve a more prominent role in their organizations. As you pointed out there, you really just need to see if you have the main things, not all the things, but the main things, or quite simply the opportunity will pass you by. And I think it's a case of don't let perfect get in the way of really, really good.
Absolutely. I had a conversation recently with my incumbent who's taken over the role, and I was just giving her some coaching, and I said, your job as a leader is to make decisions. You may not have every fact that secures it's the 100% the right decision, but you've got to make a decision. And here's the other thing: if it turns out to be the wrong thing, own it, move on from it. Don't dwell in the past.
Yeah, it reminds me of a comment that one strategy leader, he was a chief strategy officer at a really, really high growth company, said to us, and it's something that has stuck in my mind ever since, is that I rob you of an opportunity to grow if I don't give you feedback. Whether that's good or bad feedback, I suppose the person receiving the feedback determines that. But as long as the intentions are around development and growth, and I think it's hugely important to have the courage to be able to give that feedback, because as a leader, it takes a tremendous courage to do that, because sometimes it's not a popular thing to do. Let me ask you this: what's your experience, or with respect to, have you experienced any resistance when you're leading men as opposed to women? No.
Funnily enough, no. In sort of my early real leadership, I'll definitely look back and I'll have made mistakes, but
is it something you're conscious of, or yeah, okay.
I think, again, the women probably are harder on the women, and both from a top down and a bottom up.
Yeah.
Whereas men actually take direction incredibly well, and they receive feedback very well. They tend to be less, quote unquote, emotional. And I want to be careful of that term, because emotional sounds negative. But I think what I try to say to women is, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's actually okay to go, you know what, I actually don't have the answer here, and look for that answer within your team. And when you do that, whether it's a man or a woman, they are incredibly responsive to wanting to help you get there. So it's kind of a roundabout way of saying, no, I have had no issue leading men.
Well, you're talking to a man who has had multiple female bosses, and generally speaking, when you say emotional, I'm saying that they, I found that they're very attuned or sensitive to more sensitive than a lot of other bosses that maybe I've had, to kind of, your career progression, your well-being, and all of these elements, and also extremely focused. I mean, for me, I think certainly that's why we should see a lot more women in leadership, if I'm being 100% honest with you. Anyway, look, from you're undoubtedly busy, Rebecca. I mean, being a senior tech leader with 3 kids and another big baby at home. Ross, I'm
obviously hearing on future episodes, just for our listeners.
I'm obviously talking about Ross. So I'm wondering, like, how do you take care of yourself and maintain a good mental health?
Yeah, well, like, I kind of actually shuffle my schedule around exercise. I come from a family that was always very, very active, so I prioritize that above everything else. Even sometimes my family, because I firmly believe the saying is, you put your own oxygen mask on first. If you don't look after yourself, you're useless to everyone else. So I have a really great personal trainer who I joke and call my therapist. And some days we're laughing together, and other days I'm ranting to him. But that is, for me, first and foremost. I absolutely love socializing. I think that's been the hardest part with lockdown. Is that just general socializing. So with your team, I would have loved just the chats and seeing how people are at every level, and then obviously meeting up with friends. You miss that, but when things go back to normal, that's something I would absolutely do. I do practice mindfulness. There are certain times where I need it more than others, but it's I always think there's a lot of tools that you sort of draw on to keep you balanced.
How do you balance it? Like, because from an outward perspective, right? People look at certain levels of success, right? So there's everyone looking at everyone else. That's the way I see the world. And they're, in your social circles, there's the Joneses and so on, who seem to have it all. But for me, I don't give a shit about having it all. Quite frankly, I give a shit about having it right for what matters to me, right? So that's what I would say. So what do you believe that balance is, like, in terms of self-satisfaction, in terms of achieving certain things? Like, what does that look like in your world? Because, like, I don't give a shit about the car we drive, things like that. The house might be in bits, etc. We had a refurb recently, and I'm still doing it, quite frankly. But what does that look like? What is balance really?
Well, balance is not balance, for starters. I think that's the first thing you need to throw out the window, is the sense that everything is equally loaded. At certain times, I will need more exercise than I do need, maybe to be with you lot. And other times I will say, no, actually, I do need to be at home and do nothing. I think the first thing is that concept, like I said, of balance, sounding like all things are equal, and they're just not. At certain times, you need to give more of yourself, either to your family or to your job or to your health. And at any one time, you're probably getting 2 out of 3. And depending on what the biggest thing you're trying to achieve, then
fucking talk about it to each other. I think that's the big thing that I see when people have levels of frustration. We see it in our own families, where you're like, talk to each other, have a chat, sit down, have the hard words out on the table, and see, well, where are we going to go from here? Because ostrich behavior leads to further calamities. It's really that simple.
Yeah, and we're lucky in the job we do, is that we've been invested in by the companies we work in how to communicate effectively. And it's a gift, and it's you absolutely see the difference between somebody who can and can't communicate, and the relationships around them. So,
but it can be extremely difficult. I mean, let me ask you this, and I'm curious, genuinely curious about this. Have you, in any role that you've worked, let's say it's a new role, or it's a new environment, or it's something else, have you ever gone into work and been afraid?
Oh, 100%. And you should be, because if you're not afraid, or at least concerned, it means you're not growing. If you're 100% comfortable, you're not growing. And that's what I say to women, particularly when they're having that maybe imposter syndrome. Is like, oh God, like, great, you're learning, you're challenged. That's how you know. Now, the challenge then is not to show that. And when I say don't show it, yes, be vulnerable, but don't be like, oh my God, I can't believe I got this. I have no idea. But equally, just, as I said earlier, asking people for help. Like, I'll be doing this in my new role in a couple of weeks, where I absolutely know I will not know everything. And rather than pretend I do, just go, guys, like, what's it all about? How do you approach it? What would you suggest I should be looking for? And a bit like today, people love being asked questions.
Yeah.
That's what selling is, by the way. One tip for people in business development roles is you're not there to answer questions. You're there to ask them, and it's so powerful.
Telling is not selling. I definitely believe in that. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think helped you the most to make a career as a woman? I mean, you mentioned that an old mentor of yours gave you a shot, and probably at a time when you didn't believe in yourself. And I think it's fair to say we've all been there, and we can all point to somebody who has helped us along the way, which indeed is the ultimate definition of being a leader, is that it becomes not about you anymore. Yeah. And it becomes about everybody else and everybody else's development. What's the biggest factor that has helped you to be successful, do you think?
Again, I kind of thought about this.
And if you say support from my husband, I'm going to puke.
I mean, you do need a partner that's going to think of your career as important, if not more than theirs. So I will say that. I think there is a level of just the type of person I am. I'm highly competitive with myself.
Where does that come from? And I'm sorry to jump in with another question. I'm very curious about what drives. Where do you think that comes from in terms of, you wanted to continuously progress your career or improve? Where does that come from? And based on what you shared, like, do you feel under pressure to do that?
No, and that's the funny thing, right?
Okay.
If you asked me sort of 10 years ago, where do you see yourself? I'd never have said, I want to be a director, I want to be a VP. My whole strategy has always been to do the best job that I can do in the current job that I'm in. And because I've always done that, it has afforded me progression. I haven't actually actively gone out and built a roadmap and said, I want to be here at this stage, I want to be here at this stage. So it really just comes down to having always said, I am going to do this job to the absolute best, because that's how competitive I am with myself.
The way I see that is, like, Will Smith talks about him and his brother building a wall when they were younger. His father said, build that wall. And rather than focus on a task which they had no skills on, they said, let's just lay this one brick absolutely perfectly. We'll focus on that brick in that line, and then we'll replicate that. And Tony Robbins says, people overestimate what they can achieve in a year and underestimate what they can achieve and have achieved in a decade. And that's 100%. Very much the way I see it. Focus on the now, what you can control.
But it's hugely important, I think, in your world, given your current role, is that you have BDRs and SDRs kind of rocking in the door with huge expectations about being, account executives. And, that role is, in our view, that role has changed significantly, because you're not going to be in those roles in 3 months or 6 months. It takes a minimum of 18 months to be really, really good, in business development and understanding, value and impact and all of these hugely important elements of helping, customers solve, their daily challenges. So I think this message is really important, and it's always been kind of my mantra to a lot of people that I have brought into organizations and developed, is that, like, be really, really good at the job you have. Like, how can you expect to go somewhere else if you're shit at the job you really have? And not only that, the context needs to be against your own ability, not what everybody else is doing. And I have a phrase. Some guy came up to me and I said, Hey man, I think you could do 20% more on this and this and this. And he said, but like, everyone else is doing this or whatever. And I said, yeah, like, do you want to be king of the shite?
How eloquent, John.
Yeah. Oh, very eloquent at the time. But he received it in a way that said, hold on a minute. And it's really about pushing people to the best of their ability to do things that they probably think they can't do, but you see something in them as a leader to say, I think you can do this. I don't care what everybody else is doing. I think you can do better than everybody else, you know? And I think that gives people a sense of confidence that, you know, everybody just wants someone to believe in them, don't they?
Yeah, and I think to be fair to the generation that are coming in as BDRs, they're surrounded by social media, which is showing them everyone else is doing everything better and quicker and shorter. So, you know, really the first thing I do is try and explain to them the difference between ambition versus impatience. And a lot of people think they're being ambitious, but because they're like, I will be in sales in 6 months, forget about your 13, 18 months, because they think that's what ambition is. But actually that's just impatience. And I always say, this is the hardest part of the sales cycle that you will be doing. Why would you rush it? Why would you be saying to yourself, I'm going to limit the time I have to learn? It's also the safest time in their career, because they
can fail, right?
Well, yeah, you can fail, but you've got incredible leaders around you. You've got people that invest and spend time and coach you, and particularly in Oracle, nowhere does it better than Oracle. Coaching, the training, the development. And I actually say to them, you won't realize what you've learned until you look back in 5 and 10 years. So what I say to you now, you know, you'll absorb like 10% of it. But if the one thing you absorb is, you know, understand deeply, this is the long game here. You are here to play the long game. You fundamentally need to understand the difference between ambition versus impatience.
Talk to me about developing people. Talk to me about like some people that you have brought along the journey that you feel really proud that they were able to get insight from your own learnings and the stumbling blocks you had and how you overcame them.
Yeah, so my incumbent in Oracle now, Brunel McKenna, she's leading the team, and you know, that's my legacy is that team. But you know, your job as a leader is not to create a path such that nobody fails behind you, but to give them the confidence that when they fail, that they pick themselves back up and keep going. And that's hard because you know, the easier thing is to step in and go, I'll take that, you know, it's a big thing, but they don't learn from it. And then, you know, they can never overcome those challenges or know how to deal with them. And I think that's what we spent the most time in her career development is, as she progressed to director, is going, you know, this is now what you need to be aware of. It's not understanding the minutiae, it's thinking broadly. And I said, being vulnerable, being compassionate, you know, not being perfect.
Why do you think that's changed? So, you know, our parents' generation, I mean, I feel like they were from the kind of baby boomer post-war kind of era where they were job for life kind of folks and stability and pensions, a pensionable job and so on. And I think that stems from the fact that certainly in this country, we went from being one of the poorest in Europe to now being the wealthiest in a generation, in fact, in 15 years, where actually fluidity in your job is a welcome thing because it means you're progressing and you can become institutionalized by staying in a job a decade or 2 decades or even longer, God forbid. Whereas our parents welcome that and they see that as stability and you've got your head screwed on. But talk to me about that and why our parents see failure as bad, but actually our generation see failure as a good thing. And God knows I've failed, you've failed, we've all failed. But why is it that we see that as a good thing and a reflective thing that we can learn from?
I think we're probably quite privileged, first of all, to be able to fail, and that when you really look at it, you're not failing, it's more a stumbling block. But, you know, parents coming out of post-war time were, you think about that Maslow hierarchy of need, and you kind of look at that bottom layer of basically food and shelter. Like, we take that absolutely for granted, whereas they didn't. You know, the jokes of they ate what was given to them, and if they didn't, there was nothing else to eat. Whereas we've gone so far the other way. We make 3 meals for different kids every day. So
great point. And that's what annoys me about the snowflake generation. They're like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Get real.
I know, but you can't be that person who uses your own experience to formulate somebody else's. They can, like our parents would have said the same, you know, the fact that we do move, they're like, Jesus, back in our day, we'd never have done that. And you're like,
what happened? Oh my gosh. We need an intervention here.
I think we're just, possibly it's a level of protection from them, as in, oh God, at least if you get this, you're in for life. And life is not about protecting people from failure. It's about helping them cope with it and giving them the tools to say not everything will work out, but here's how you deal with it, and kind of practicing non-reactivity and practicing, you know, catastrophizing things and stuff. So I just think we because we've moved on from that base layer of needs towards more mental health and coping strategies, that's where we are different from that previous generation.
But in a negative way, you know, at least in that generation, when you went inside your front door and you closed the door, the world was left behind. Whereas the pressures of social media and all of these elements, and you know, I'm not going to get on the soapbox here, but it's always on. It's always on, and it just reminds me of the need for people to have the discipline and the courage to say that, you know, even though we're all working remotely now, I'm switching off at 5 o'clock. I'm not available. I'm not available at, and you know, it was back to that that work-life balance thing, wasn't it? That you know, here's the work I'm going to put in. Has actually, and we are touching on the you know, the COVID thing and the lockdown and all that stuff. The how does that affect leadership? I always think that the, you know, leadership is kind of, you know, not only do you have to, you kind of have to be seen, you know, as the school teacher in the classroom, and you're ever present, ensuring that, you know, you're having multiple conversations, and you know, it's very hard to replicate those water cooler talks and the cup of coffee talks, and you know, all of the and being able to kind of look at your team's body language or individual's body language, or get the tone or sense of what's going on in general. It's very hard to get all of that online. Has leadership, do you think, become more difficult as a result of the COVID?
Look, I think the emotional intelligence has had to be kicked up a notch. And I think for people who maybe struggled with that in the first place, they'll find it hard, because you're now looking for the cues through Zoom. So the folding of the arms, the looking down, the head resting on the hand. I think you've got to kick up that, I suppose, radar a bit. I think there's a lot to be said for one-to-one time particularly with business development reps. So I did half-hour slots with just to talk about them. Kind of goes back to what I said earlier, is people love being asked questions and being listened to. And the impact of 30 minutes with BDRs will buy you, honestly, an extra 6 months. And I know that for a fact, because I had one BDR who said to me, you know what, that chat we had back in December actually was the tipping point for me choosing whether I would stay or go. And that he's now there still 6 months later, and he has attributed that to me. And that wasn't my objective. It was literally just to have a chat, you know, and see how they are. But that's where you got to really, as a leader, you don't just think one layer down or up. You've got to think multiple layers.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like that. So just to round home here, Rebecca, you have a decent pedigree in marketing, and you know, your career started there. How do you think your marketing skills and experience complement your current job?
Good question. Because on paper I didn't see it to begin with, but I think it's that buyer journey. Understanding, you know, where people are, you know, what digital marketing, particularly digital, has gone on at the point of when you're talking to them as a BDR. And that's something that, you know, if you're trying to, particularly to reposition yourself like Oracle were 5 years ago into a cloud business, you know, I'd say if you think of it as like one big ship, and you've got to turn, you know, the front before the back follows. You know, marketing and BDG are probably 80% of that turning. And then, you know, when sales are ready to really sell it, you need that pipeline in the form of what has gone before it to be really honed. And that's exactly where Oracle are right now. with the investment of kind of marketing and BDG hand in hand 5 years ago.
That's cool. Yeah, it's this digital experience, or the CX as we call it, the customer experience, and you know, it seems like you're a big proponent of the concept, and you have a huge focus on your customers and buyers, which arguably should be the case. A lot of people, I talk to a lot of people, I read a lot of stuff, and it's this CX customer experience stuff. It's as though it's something new. And I'm going, hold on a minute. I just think people are more deliberate about it. They're really getting into it on a granular level, you know. And for our listeners, we define customer experience as reducing friction throughout the buyer's journey and being easy to buy from.
Yeah.
And I know from speaking to some of the market leaders in this that they typically take a blank page approach to designing processes that provide a differentiated experience. But it can be really hard. If you've tons of channels and tons of products and tons of buyer personas, that is a huge undertaking for any organization. How has your experience been with, I suppose, the last company you worked for, Oracle? How are they doing it? Are they doing it reasonably well? Is it slow? Kind of talk to us about that.
I mean, Oracle is truly blessed in that they have content and persona mapping like I've never seen it before. And I always say to the guys, you don't understand what you have. This doesn't exist in other companies. There isn't an internal website where you go and choose, what would I like to talk about with the, CEO or CTO or whatever it is. But you know what it comes down to? Like, people are people at the end of the day, whether you're selling technology or a dress or something. And what I've actually repositioned my team to do is tell stories when they're talking to customers, and not like really heavily curated, let me tell you about the technology impact of this company. Like,
yeah, what do you mean stories? Presumably not there was three bears and Goldilocks.
No, not far off it. Right? I'll give you an example, right?
Okay.
About the impact of technology, and I was working directly with a group of business development reps. So this is a little bit lengthy, right? But I think you'll see why. They're on this pilot for 7 weeks, and their whole job is to bring a customer from unaware through to engagement, consideration, and purchase. And as we were getting further down the funnel, they were kind of struggling to get that connection between, okay, we know what you need to do, and here's the solution to do it. And everyone's talking about, okay, bring in customer stories, great. But a customer story that's really curated also just lands quite really heavy. So we said, look, let's rehearse how we tell stories about our technology, and let's start with, what is the customer trying to achieve, and why would it matter to their end customer? And one day we had this wonderful girl, Chiara, an Italian girl, and she told the story of CERN. And CERN, as you probably have an awareness of, is based in Switzerland, and they do lots of stuff with physics that I don't understand, but it doesn't matter about understanding that or not. But the story goes that she went to CERN to observe the chamber that they have where they clash particles together, and they identified, I think, the fifth element of the universe. And
the Higgs boson.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
See, I knew you'd know. I was like, save me, because I don't. But the story is around the Oracle technology, is that they were evolving at a rate that was faster than the technology to capture the data behind it. So, they then transformed their data platform over to Oracle again. But the story was that the day that she went there was the day she got her offer from Oracle. And I was like, that, now you've suddenly connected something really kind of, and Oracle did this and they got their data and now they can keep building, into something that the customer's like, oh my God, there's a human element behind it. So that's what I'm trying to get them to talk about, is not just what did the tech do for that company, but what was the emotional connection? What's the human connection? What did that mean for their customers? So now they can keep evolving and keep, doing all these tests that find out more and more about our universe. And yeah, the tech is just a byproduct, but what people remember is Oracle, CERN, and Chiara. And I think that's just what I'm really encouraging people to do, is connect that.
Yeah, because like nothing sticks in your head better than a story, and because stories express the most complicated ideas in very digestible ways. And I couldn't agree with you more with respect to stories. And the so in terms of those stories then, and the personalization and the human kind of contact piece, have you dabbled at all with video in outreach or outbound at all?
Yeah, video. It's funny that kind of popped its head a couple of years ago, and I think it resonates well with people who can come across really authentic. And I think the reality is that's a small percentage of people. Like, I know.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I'm glad. I am sick to my back teeth of watching fucking contrived videos of people that are really pushing it with respect to a message or whatever, and it just is so contrived, and it's so false and non-authentic, and all of these kind of things that would immediately cause me to press delete rather than the other way around.
I think, like I said, Ross was like, do you want to do video on this? I was like, absolutely not, because it's not something I'm comfortable with. Like, the whole concept of like standing up and improv, like, gives me fear. There are people who can do it amazingly, and you can connect to that brilliantly, but that's a very small percentage. And I think,
how do you get people's attention today, though, in the buyer journey? So you're that BDR, SDR, you're sat in your department in Oracle. What was your department in Oracle? Like, and you're vying for attention. John mentioned video there. Like, what do you do that's innovative to get that pattern interrupt and even get the story told to get that chance?
The most innovative thing is actually care about the person you're talking to at the other end. Like, we all get the emails, hi, Rebecca, we are such and such, and we've worked with people like da, 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 and they have not connected for 1 second with you, either as a persona or a company. So the most innovative thing you can do is be authentic and say, spend the time, research that person. What are they doing as an individual? What content are they sharing? And I will always talk to somebody who's taken 2 seconds to read one of the many articles I've written, because it's there in front of them. You're not going to a library anymore to do your research. It's all there, and it's just laziness if you're not doing it. So
it's the language. It's the language as well, and the storytelling. And if I told you a story, I started school when I was 12 years of age. I went straight in the front door, and I was greeted by 2 teachers, and they asked me, did I bring my lunch? And if I say you start school at 12 years of age and you go in the front door and immediately you're met by 2 teachers and they ask you, do you have your lunch? Those 2 stories, you hear both of those stories differently, because the first one was I, and the second story, exact same story, the second story is you. And it's amazing, the word you and the focus, as you said, when, I take time out to consider, what's might be really important to somebody, what they might be struggling with, etc. When I do that, you can be very powerful.
Yeah, and I'll leave you with this, right? Because I think we could probably spend another 2 hours, but for people's interest level, we had a great saying when it came to how do you nurture a relationship. And I'll go back to my mentor at the start, Declan Kenny. He said, like, you wouldn't ask somebody to marry them on the first date.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly it. Why would it be different in a buyer relationship? Nurture it, spend time, earn the right to have a conversation.
Indeed. No, I couldn't agree with that more. Okay, well, look, I can't thank you enough for being our guest today. I want to just leave our listeners with one final thought from your perspective around making decisions on a company. So if you're faced with whatever stage you're at in your career journey, how do you evaluate what a good company looks like? What do you look for?
The people. Who do you meet on that journey? First and foremost, and the tech. I'm passionate about technology, having worked in Oracle. So for me, those are the 2 things.
Fantastic. It's insightful indeed. Well, look, thank you very much for joining. I'm absolutely convinced our listeners will get a ton of value from today's discussion. So appreciate it.
They're probably waiting for the fights.
That'll happen after we stop recording.
Thanks, John.
Pleasure to speak with you, Rebecca. Thanks so much for sharing all of those insights. We'll have you back for sure again.
No doubt.
Thanks, Mel. Bye.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.